Morning, good afternoon, and good evening. Welcome to this webinar session. I'm Tony Schönenberger. I'm the Executive Chairman of STARS. STARS is a global platform for dialogue, and we even want to think about the unknown unknowns. In this context, I'm pleased to inform you that STARS is preparing two symposia in Singapore and in Switzerland, and a study tour to China, and a study tour to Romania. Please visit our website for more information. Now, no doubt, geopolitical, geoeconomic, and geotechnological intelligence is a must for any leader in business and society. So today, we are continuing our webinar series on complexity is destiny, orientation in times of no direction. And today, we have the great privilege to talk to John R. Allen. Welcome, John. Great to have you on this webinar session.
Thank you, Tony. It's great to be with you always. Yep.
Thank you. John Allen is a strategic advisor to Microsoft. He is a four-star general retired U.S. Marine Corps. He commanded the U.S. and NATO forces in Afghanistan. In other words, John is a global leader in defense strategy, in emerging technologies, and international security. And last but not least, I'm very proud to say John is also a member of the STARS Global Advisory Panel. And in addition to that, he's a frequent speaker at STARS Symposia, be it in Singapore or in Switzerland. John, we are very much looking forward to your insights.
Thank you. It's great to be with you today.
Thank you. We have now 30 minutes to discuss with John Allen. If you have any questions, please use the Q&A feature below and type in your questions. And again, I encourage you to do it as quickly as possible because we are running out of time very, very quickly. So let's start, and I have the great privilege to ask the first couple of questions. Complexity is Destiny, I just said, is the title of our webinar series. And indeed, if you look at the world today, a forward-looking tracking of geopolitical, geoeconomic, and geotechnological dynamics is needed. John, what worries you most these days?
Well, I think the thing that has me very concerned as we move forward is if you will, the turbulence in U.S. global leadership. That was a stabilizing influence in many respects. I know we have friends from China on the net as well listening in. And for many, many years, the stability of the global economic and security system really floated everyone's boat higher as a direct result of what would be a stable and predictable U.S. leadership in the global community and in the economic sphere and in the technology sphere. But we've seen in the last couple of years that there has been some turmoil in that, the whole issue of the so-called tariff war, which is not a war really, it's sort of an arbitrary assignment of tariffs, which has made it very difficult economically for many of our oldest friends on the planet, made it very difficult to have a stable relationship between the United States and China. And so as I think about the global environment, I worry that in many respects, the traditional and stable American leadership, which gave much of the world some capacity for certainty with regard to the global environment, is at risk right now. Now, I don't anticipate that this is going to be a permanent situation. I actually think that things will resolve within a couple of years. And of course, we are still a democracy, regardless of what some people believe. And democracies vote, and votes count, and governments change. So I think that while there could be a sense of real concern about the direction of the United States and the policies that we're seeing emerging from the current geopolitical situation in the States, I think that we'll see some changes in there. The other thing I'll say very quickly, because I know our time is limited, is that technology increasingly is going to be one of the principal influences in this century on geopolitics and geostrategic relationships. And as this becomes a greater reality going forward, we're going to have to find our way, I think, forward with some of those who would be considered some of our greatest rivals. I happen to think that there is plenty of space in this world to have a conversation with China on a regular basis for how we find our way into the 21st century in terms of collaboration and cooperation on some of the most important geotechnical issues going forward. I think there's a lot of space there. So I'm attentive to the challenges that we face now. I don't despair in them. And I think that there are solutions to most of these issues going forward.
Thank you. We will come back to some of the points later on. But first of all, John, I wanted to draw or ask a question regarding Afghanistan. I mean, you commanded the US and NATO forces in Afghanistan from 2011 to 2013. And I want to ask you about Trump's recent, let's call it defamation of NATO and also the sacrifices of NATO forces in Afghanistan. Can you elaborate a little bit on that?
Yeah, I can. You know, that comment was simply cruel. And there's no basis in fact for anything that he said. First of all, NATO was in Afghanistan because the United States was attacked on the 11th of September 2001. It is the only time that NATO ever invoked and ultimately executed Article 5 of the NATO Charter of the Washington Treaty. So our NATO allies came to our assistance when the United States was attacked, and we suffered tremendously on that day. And we eventually took the war to those who started it. And they fought alongside us. And any implication or any sense in those comments, and there was some dimension of they were a bit far back from the action was how the comment went. Any implication or inference that NATO didn't share the dangers with U.S. troops is no basis in fact. It's flat wrong. As the commander, I was all over that country all the time, and I served in the field with our NATO allies, and they served alongside Americans with great courage. They suffered great adversity in battle. And our NATO partners took casualties. And I'm about 100 meters from the Brandenburg Gate. And last night I paid tribute to the German casualties, which were not insignificant, the British casualties, which were not insignificant, the Poles and so on, the Danes. The list goes on and on. There were 50 countries, and many of them paid in blood for being shoulder to shoulder with the Americans in Afghanistan. So that comment was cruel. It was meant to be, and it's absolutely not based in fact. And I will simply tell you, as the commander of all NATO forces and the U.S. forces in Afghanistan, it's just a wrong comment. And our NATO partners and our NATO countries and our 22 other non-NATO partners were with us. All 50 countries should be very proud of how their troops ultimately served on the ground in Afghanistan.
There was a lot of criticism, as we know, about what Trump said regarding the allies and Afghanistan. But in addition to that, there is the scandal or the killing of people in Minneapolis. Are these now signs of a robust opposition against the administration, or what could this mean for the midterm elections in November of this year?
Well, part of the plank, if you will, of the policy of the Trump administration has been an aggressive attempt to address our immigration issues. The borders during the Biden administration were wide open, and thousands of individuals crossed the border in a manner which does not comport with U.S. law. And so President Trump, as part of his policy objectives, intended to begin that process of deporting those individuals. The problem, of course, is in the implementation of that policy. And there's policy, and then there's implementation of policy. The actions of ICE agents on the ground in frankly in Democratic areas, not Republican areas, but Democratic areas, far exceeded the level of violence that was necessary ultimately to achieve the objectives of this policy and its implementation. And as they became more violent, as they appeared to become operating with greater impunity, and frankly, there were senior leaders in the administration who said that the ICE agents could operate with immunity, which is not the case. No federal agent, no American law enforcement individual operates with immunity. We all have to follow the law, and we're all governed by the rule of law. This created an environment of where violence increased, and ultimately the protests increased, and the violence increased, and now we're seeing American citizens being murdered on the streets. And there is no question that those Americans were murdered. They did not pose a threat to those ICE agents. And so now what you're seeing is that the administration is reacting to that in a very serious way. The ICE commander has been relieved of duty. The immigration czar, if you will, has been sent to Minneapolis to try to cool things off. The head of the Department of Homeland Security is under enormous pressure, and a large number of the members of Congress are calling for her impeachment. So this is a reaction in a democratic society of the free members of that society to an element within the federal administration, in this case, federal law enforcement agents in the Department of Homeland Security, far exceeding the level of enforcement violence necessary to accomplish the goal of this policy.
What could that mean for the midterm elections?
Well, it could be very, very difficult for the Republicans as they go forward. I'm not a Republican or a Democrat. I'm a registered independent voter. But it doesn't take much to see that this is a Republican policy. And what we're seeing is Republican politicians are backtracking now, are criticizing these policies. And of course, the Democrats are almost in complete unity with regard to the criticism of this policy. You know, we don't go into American cities and murder American citizens ultimately for demonstrating against a policy which is being implemented with excessive force. And that will play out in the polls in our midterm elections in November of 26.
There is a question from Mark Ditley. What's your assessment of the current leadership structure in the US Armed Forces? Are there enough principled top generals left who would refuse to act on an unconstitutional order from the White House?
Well, let's make sure we're clear on the term. We use the term unlawful order, which is not just about the Constitution, but there's a whole system of law called the Uniform Code of Military Justice, which is a very focused set of laws that we are required to obey as serving officers. And I do believe that there are plenty of officers out there who will disobey an unlawful order. From the time I was a second lieutenant in the United States Marine Corps, and I'm no different than in the Army or the Navy or the Air Force or the Space Force, we are educated and trained as officers with a commission in a democratic society to disobey an unlawful order. Because to obey an unlawful order makes you criminally complicit in that order. And so it's very, very clear, and I think it's undoubted that most of our officers would do this at the drop of a hat. Now, in Afghanistan, I had a number of officers who in fact did obey unlawful orders or issued unlawful orders, and they went to prison for it. And we have seen some relatively senior officers in the U.S. military resign over this matter. So I think this is still playing out, but I don't believe that the U.S. military is in a position where it will obey unlawful orders. This is something that is ingrained in our DNA, and I believe that we're going to be okay in this.
In this context, a question from Michael Duschel. Everyone speaks about Trump. How do you see his succession if the US stay Republican, e.g., J.D. Vance takes his succession? Are things going really to calm down then?
Well, that's, a hypothetical. Who knows? I think the issue is that it's not certain at all who will succeed President Trump. I think what you will see is there are a lot of Republican governors. This just presumes that his question follows that a Republican administration follows this Republican administration. So I'll just go with that assumption. But there are a lot of Republican governors who have, I think, really substantial capabilities to govern. There are a number of Republican senators who have shown that they are not entirely part of the if you will, the not cult of personality. I don't want to use that term, but they have very distinct views from this Republican administration. So to me, it is by no means certain that Vice President Vance will be the successor to President Trump. He might well be, but I think that there will be a process to select the next Republican leader. And I think in any case, whether it's Vance or anyone else, there will be a significant difference between this administration and the next Republican administration.
Back to geopolitics. We are speaking of a new world order, and we have seen the US interventions in the Middle East, Iran, Gaza, in Venezuela. Russia seems to be absent. In addition, I would like to say that no Russian intervention when there was a regime change in Syria, and the Ukraine war is also a kind of a disaster for Russia, actually. Is Russia the big loser these days?
Well, I think so. I don't think there's any question. I mean, its attention is largely fixed on Ukraine. The strategic assumptions that Vladimir Putin operated under when he invaded Ukraine several years ago were breathtakingly wrong, false. And Russia has paid an enormous price for that at a human level, at a technological level, at an economic level, at a geopolitical level. And so its capacity ultimately to operate outside the really enormous fixture of Russian attention on Ukraine, I think, is quite limited. And we've seen that in Africa. We've seen that in the Middle East. So I think Russia has a very limited capacity to operate outside its current commitments on the ground. I mean, it's really fixed in place in Ukraine and in all those areas I said, politically, economically, militarily, technologically, and demographically. I mean, the enormity of the casualties that Russia has suffered in this war, and not dismissing any of the casualties that Ukraine has suffered in this war, will play out eventually in the Russian society. We don't know yet when that'll occur, but I think Putin will be held accountable ultimately for that.
Why is Europe so afraid of a Russian invasion of Europe?
Well, we just don't know what could happen in the future. I mean, we should be very attentive to the fact that Russia invaded a young democratic society in what they would call the near abroad. If they're willing to do that, they invaded Georgia, they've invaded the Ukraine. We've seen Russian troops at work in Kazakhstan when there was instability there. There were Russian troops that were inserted into Belarus when there was instability there. Russia has made, as a matter of foreign policy, the forcible change of borders in Europe in the 21st century. And the question becomes, if they are successful in Ukraine, why would Putin not believe that he could be conceivably successful in a further invasion of Europe? Moldova, for example. I mean, we've got to keep our eye on Moldova. We've got to keep our eye on Georgia. We've got to make it very clear that an outcome in Ukraine is not just about the security guarantees for Ukraine, but it has to be about security guarantees for other countries in the so-called near abroad that Putin and Russian czars, if you will, have always been attentive to. And one of the outcomes that I think Putin has sought to achieve has been a re-engineering of the security architecture of Europe, with the hope that the United States would be separated from that architecture. Now, happily to this point, President Trump has retained the U.S. involvement in NATO, despite the critical comments that we talked about at the top of the hour. But we still have about 80,000 American troops in Europe who are ready to fight tonight. Now, the question isn't whether American troops are ready to fight tonight. The question is, are European forces ready to fight tonight? And that's an open question. Are European forces moving towards the level of modernity and operational readiness necessary to create the conventional deterrence that will truly deter potential additional Russian aggression in the region?
Can you help us a little bit to understand the special relationship, in inverted comma, between President Trump and Putin?
I don't know what that relationship is. You'd have to address that to those two names. But I think that there were assumptions made at the beginning of this administration, President Trump's administration, that Putin would get a buy on a number of critical areas, and he hasn't actually gotten a buy from some of these areas. We saw and were deeply concerned about how the peace arrangements were going to go in Ukraine, and they have not gone, as I think many who were critical of the Trump administration and deeply concerned about the potential outcome of the war in Ukraine. It has not gone that way. So assumptions with regard to their relationship are just simply assumptions, and I have no insights into their personal relationship. But I think where Trump was believed initially to give Putin a buy on his aggression and ultimately an outcome of the war in Ukraine, that has not, I believe, come to fruition.
Very simple question, John. If you were the German Chancellor, would you support Ukraine with the Taurus, the cruise missile?
Sure.
Why doesn't he do it? Why doesn't he do it?
But ask him. I don't know. I mean, one of the reasons that I think we have done as well as, when I say we, I mean Ukraine has done as well as it has been its capacity to threaten Russian troops throughout the entire depth of Ukraine and Crimea. And as long as Russia has the capacity to make war upon Ukraine from secure areas, whether those areas are for troop concentrations or logistics depots or headquarters areas, and they can operate with impunity, with some kind of certainty as to their security, then the war will continue. If, however, Russia is disabused of the ability they can operate anywhere against Ukraine and feel safe and secure, then I think that contributes ultimately to Russia ultimately wanting to come to some kind of a conclusion on this conflict. Cruise missiles, which we have threatened to give the Ukrainians and other countries in Europe, the British, for example, gave Storm Shadow. Storm Shadow has inflicted enormous casualties on Russian forces and made it very difficult for them to operate. This is the advantage of these long-range precision systems. ATACMS, an American system, has inflicted enormous damage on Russian systems. You know, none of us want to be in a position where we're killing large numbers of Russians. But this war is continuing, and there has to be some level of pain inflicted on the aggressor in this matter. And let's all remember that Russia is the aggressor in this. The attack on Ukraine today, every single day, is meant to kill Ukrainian innocent civilians and to disadvantage them in the depth of a winter where they take out the power and the capability of Ukrainians to heat their homes and to care for their children and their families. Ukrainians didn't wage war on Russia. The Russians have waged war on Ukraine. And we have an obligation ultimately to give Ukraine the weapon systems necessary both to defend itself and to set the conditions for an outcome for peace that favors Ukraine and Europe and the European security architecture. So if the Germans are interested in whether that cruise missile is valuable or not, I would counsel that it is. They'll have to make the decision themselves. It's a sovereign decision.
We have to turn into the Middle East quickly, and as I know, you are really an expert also on the Middle East, on Iran, etc. 30,000 or even more people were killed in the recent couple of weeks. Is the US preparing an intervention? This is also a question, by the way, from Jörg Wuttke. Are we seeing something tonight or the day after tonight?
Well, first, I want to be very clear. I do not have access to, nor do I operate with intelligence information or classified information. So I want to be very clear about that up front. But the United States deals in multi-domain operations. We are very good at multi-domain operations. And as you saw in Venezuela, whether you like Venezuela's intervention or not, long before American special operators entered the airspace of Venezuela, our cyber capabilities had been brought to bear ultimately to set the conditions for a favorable outcome in the physical domain. So my guess would be that were we to intervene long before that would occur, we would have set the conditions in the cyberspace and in other domains, space, etc., so that if we introduce physical forces into the equation to punish Iran, and that's what it would basically be, that it would be a punishment of Iran. for the deaths of, we don't know the number, but it's estimated that 30,000 were killed in such a short period of time. Is the United States going to intervene? I don't know. Could we if we chose to? Absolutely. And Iran would not be able to do anything about it, frankly.
Thank you. And we are running out of time. So my last question would be for you, John, as a strategic advisor to Microsoft. I know you're really focused on these questions too, on AI, on future war, etc. Where do you see the risks and the opportunities thinking of AI and defense?
Well, there's an adage, and I believe in it, that technologies are neutral. The nature of the outcome of the application of technologies tends to assume the character of the parties that apply them. And I can tell you, and this is not an advertisement for Microsoft, but the work that is underway at Microsoft to apply advanced technologies, and in particular artificial intelligence, cloud computing, etc., has at its heart the intent to do good for humanity. And I think that's the case with most of the Western technologies, the techno companies, the hyperscalers, which mostly are American, the tech companies in Europe, the tech companies in East Asia. I believe that they really have at heart not just a favorable bottom line, but the outcome of the application of their technologies doing good for humanity. Now, there are plenty of countries out there that have access to or have the capacity to develop technologies that will not be good for humanity. Massive surveillance of populations, the capacity of technology to target dissidents, etc. That's out there. The technologies aren't significantly different one from another. It is how the technologies are ultimately applied through the leadership of countries or the leadership of tech companies that depicts the character ultimately of those who apply those technologies. Microsoft is seized with the issue of applying its technologies for good. That's the best I can do at this point, Tony, and I believe that that's going to be the challenge that we see going forward in the 21st century. How tech companies and countries apply technologies for the good of humanity, the reduction of inequality in society, and ultimately setting the conditions for forward progress economically and politically for humanity.
Great statement. Thank you very much, John. We have to come to an end. Sorry for all the questions I couldn't ask. Time is up, unfortunately. First, John, again, thank you very much for your brilliant insights. I think we all benefited an awful lot from your insights, from the background information. And indeed, we are facing disruptions all over. So orientation from experts like you is really needed. So thank you very much again, John.
Thank you, Tony.
We wish you
Good to be
all the
with you.
best. We wish you all the best. And personally, I'm very much looking forward to seeing you again in Singapore in June. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Take care. Please be well.
Thank you. We are continuing this webinar series on the 12th of February. The speaker will be Jörg Wuttke, who also attended or participated at this webinar session. Jörg is a partner at DGA Group, a consulting firm based in Washington, D.C., and he is President Emeritus of the EU Chamber of Commerce in China. I suppose we will speak a lot about China then next time. Hope to see you then. Goodbye for now. Thank you.